Imagine waking up tomorrow and you're 100 years old. Not 70, not 80, 100. You've been alive for an entire century. When you were born, the world looked completely different. The people around you were different. The technology was different. Even the air you're breathing right now contains molecules that have entered and left your body countless times. But somehow, after 100 years of sunlight, gravity, food, disease, stress, sleep, movement, and roughly billions of heartbeats, you're still here. So what does a century of being alive actually do to the human body? And more importantly, how is it possible for some people to reach 100 at all? Let's start with the part everyone notices first. Your skin. At 100, your skin is dramatically different from the skin you had at 20. When you're young, your skin contains plenty of collagen and elastin. Think of them like the scaffolding and elastic bands holding everything together. Collagen gives skin strength. Elastin helps it stretch and bounce back. But as you age, your body produces less of both. The layer of fat underneath the skin also becomes thinner. Oil production decreases, your skin becomes drier, more fragile, and less elastic. Then, gravity gets involved. For an entire century, it has been pulling on your face. Every second, every minute, every day. Combine that with sunlight, facial expressions, genetics, and normal biological aging. And eventually, wrinkles become part of the landscape. But here's something interesting. Wrinkles aren't simply evidence that your body is wearing out. They're also a record. Every smile, every squint, every afternoon spent outside. Your face has essentially been keeping receipts. And then there's your hair. By 100, there's a good chance much of it has turned gray or white. Hair gets its color from pigment-producing cells called melanocytes. As you age, those pigment-producing systems become less active. Eventually, new hairs grow with less pigment, then almost none. But gray hair is only the beginning. Hair follicles themselves can shrink, hair becomes thinner, growth slows, and in some places, it may stop altogether. Meanwhile, something even stranger has been happening to your height. You may actually be shorter than you used to be, sometimes noticeably shorter. Between the bones of your spine are soft discs that act like cushions. Over decades, they lose water. They become thinner. Your posture may change. Muscles supporting the spine weaken, and the bones themselves can lose density. Add everything together, and a person can lose several centimeters of height with age. In other words, you spent your childhood desperately trying to grow taller, only for biology to eventually start taking some of it back. But the biggest changes are happening underneath the skin. Let's look at your skeleton. Bone looks permanent. It isn't. Your skeleton is living tissue. Throughout your life, old bone is constantly being removed, and new bone is constantly being built. It's basically a construction site that never completely closes. When you're young, construction works extremely well, but later in life, the balance can shift. Bone may be removed faster than it is replaced. The internal structure becomes less dense, more fragile, and easier to fracture. That's why a fall that a 20-year-old might laugh off can be life-changing at 100. Your hips are particularly important. So are your spine and wrists. But your bones aren't aging alone, because wrapped around them are your muscles. And this is where aging can become surprisingly dramatic. Starting in adulthood, humans gradually lose muscle mass and strength. The process is called sarcopenia. By very old age, without regular physical activity, the difference can become enormous. Muscle fibers shrink. Some motor neurons are lost. Explosive strength decreases. Balance becomes harder. Standing up from a chair may require more effort. Climbing stairs becomes more difficult. Even opening a stubborn jar can turn into a legitimate boss battle. And here's the problem. Muscles aren't just for lifting things. They're part of your survival system. Strong legs help prevent falls. Strong muscles help you maintain independence. They help regulate blood sugar. They support joints. They help you recover from illness. So one of the most important predictors of healthy aging isn't how young someone looks. It's how well they can still move. Which brings us to your heart. If you've reached 100, your heart deserves some respect. It has been contracting, relaxing, contracting, relaxing, without weekends, without vacations, for a century. But an older heart isn't identical to a younger one. The heart muscle can become stiffer, the walls may thicken, its maximum pumping capacity during intense exercise generally decreases. And the electrical system controlling your heartbeat can change. Your blood vessels change too. Young arteries are flexible. When the heart pushes blood into them, they expand slightly, then spring back. But with age, arteries tend to become stiffer. Think of the difference between a new rubber hose and one that's been sitting outside for decades. The older one still works, but it doesn't bend quite the same way. That stiffness contributes to higher blood pressure and forces the heart to work harder. Yet, if you're standing here at 100, your cardiovascular system has clearly done something right. Now, take a breath, because your lungs have been aging too. When you're young, your lungs and chest wall are highly elastic. You inhale, you exhale, and the system responds efficiently. Over time, the chest wall can become stiffer, respiratory muscles may weaken, lung tissue loses some elasticity, and the total amount of air you can forcefully move decreases. You may notice this when climbing stairs, walking uphill, or trying to chase a grandchild who apparently has unlimited energy. But the lungs still have an enormous reserve. That's one reason many older people can remain active surprisingly late in life. Now let's move upstairs, to the organ people worry about most when they think about aging, your brain. At 100, your brain is physically different from the brain you had at 20. Certain regions have lost volume, some neurons have been lost, connections between brain cells have changed, blood flow may be reduced, and signals can travel more slowly. That can mean slower reaction times. It may take longer to remember a name. Learning something completely new may require more repetition. You walk into a room, stop, and suddenly wonder why you're there. Although, to be fair, 20-year-olds do that too, but here's the important part. Aging is not the same thing as dementia. Reaching 100 does not automatically mean losing your identity, your personality, or your ability to think. Some centenarians remain remarkably cognitively sharp. The brain can adapt. It can use alternative networks, it can strengthen existing connections, and it can compensate for some age-related changes. This ability is often discussed as part of cognitive reserve. Think of it like having multiple roads leading to the same destination. If one road becomes difficult, the brain may sometimes find another route, and certain abilities can remain surprisingly resilient. Vocabulary, knowledge accumulated over decades, emotional understanding, pattern recognition built through experience. At 100, you may not process information as quickly as your 20-year-old self, but your 20-year-old self also didn't have a century of experience. Speed isn't everything. Then there are your eyes. The lens inside each eye gradually becomes stiffer with age. That's why focusing on nearby objects becomes harder. The pupils become smaller. Less light reaches the retina. Adapting to darkness takes longer. Colors may appear less vivid. And conditions like cataracts become increasingly common. Your ears change too. Tiny sensory structures involved in hearing can become damaged over decades. Higher frequency sounds are often the first to become difficult to hear, which creates an unfortunate situation. Everyone around you thinks they're speaking normally, and you're wondering why the entire world has suddenly started mumbling. Taste and smell can weaken as well. Food may seem less intense, and because smell contributes enormously to flavor, a weaker sense of smell can make eating less enjoyable. But your digestive system doesn't simply shut down, neither do your kidneys, neither does your liver. They continue working, just usually with less reserve. Your kidneys are a particularly interesting example. Inside them are microscopic filtering units called nephrons. You begin life with a huge number of them, but their number and efficiency generally decline with age. Blood flow through the kidneys decreases, filtering capacity drops, and the body becomes less forgiving of dehydration, certain medications, or sudden illness. At 20, your organs often have enormous backup capacity. At 100, the machinery may still work remarkably well, but there's less room for error. And that idea applies to another major system, your immune system. You've spent a century encountering viruses, bacteria, fungi, and countless other biological threats. Your immune system has built an extraordinary library of encounters, but aging changes how that system responds. Some immune responses become slower. The body may not react to new infections as aggressively. Vaccines can sometimes produce weaker responses. At the same time, low-level chronic inflammation tends to increase with age. Researchers sometimes call this inflammaging. Yes, scientists actually came up with that word, and it's surprisingly important. Long-term inflammation is associated with many diseases of aging, but now we need to zoom in even further, past your organs, past your tissues, into your cells. Because the real story of aging is happening at microscopic scale. Every day, your cells experience damage. DNA gets damaged, proteins become misshapen, mitochondria become less efficient, waste accumulates. Usually, your body repairs the damage. Damaged proteins are recycled, DNA is repaired, old cells are removed, new cells replace them. But after a century, those repair systems aren't quite as efficient. Some damaged cells stop dividing, but refuse to die. These are called senescent cells. You can think of them as retired cells that forgot to leave the office. They don't perform their old jobs properly, and they can release chemical signals that affect nearby tissue. Scientists are intensely interested in these cells. Because they may play an important role in aging, then there are telomeres. At the ends of your chromosomes are protective structures called telomeres. They're often compared to the plastic tips on shoelaces. Each time many types of cells divide, those telomeres can become shorter. Eventually, cells may reach a point where dividing becomes difficult or impossible. But here's where things get complicated. There isn't one single aging switch. No countdown clock hidden inside your chest reaches zero. Aging is the combined result of many processes happening simultaneously. DNA damage, cellular changes, hormones, inflammation, metabolism, environmental exposure, lifestyle, random chance, and genetics. Which brings us to the really interesting question. Why do some people reach 100 while others don't? There's no single answer. Genetics matters, but genes aren't the entire story. Lifestyle matters. Smoking matters, physical activity matters, diet matters, healthcare matters, environment matters, social circumstances matter, and luck matters more than anyone likes admitting. But researchers studying centenarians have noticed something fascinating. Some people who reach extreme old age appear to delay major age-related diseases until surprisingly late in life. They don't necessarily avoid aging. They may simply spend more of their lives relatively healthy and compress serious illness into a shorter period near the end. And then there are even rarer people, supercentenarians, people who reach at least 110 years old. At that point, you're entering one of the most exclusive clubs on Earth. Very few humans ever get there. And researchers study these people closely, because their bodies may contain clues about what protects humans from disease and biological aging. Maybe it's unusual genetics. Maybe unusually efficient cellular repair. Maybe their immune systems age differently. Maybe it's a combination of hundreds of tiny advantages. We're still figuring it out. But perhaps the strangest thing about reaching 100 isn't what changed, it's what didn't. Your skin changed. Your bones changed. Your muscles changed. Your heart changed. Your lungs changed. Your brain changed. Many of the cells in your body have been replaced again and again. The molecules inside you have constantly entered, left, and been replaced. And yet, for an entire century, there has been one continuous person experiencing all of it. You, the 5-year-old who scraped their knee, the teenager who thought they knew everything, the adult trying to figure life out, the older person remembering people and places that no longer exist, all connected by one continuous biological story. 100 years, billions of heartbeats, hundreds of millions of breaths, countless meals, dreams, arguments, laughs, illnesses, recoveries, ordinary Tuesdays nobody remembers. And somehow, this collection of cells kept going. That's what makes a 100-year-old human body so extraordinary. Not because it escaped aging, it didn't, but because for an entire century, it repaired itself, adapted, compensated, fought infections, healed wounds, rebuilt tissues, and kept you alive, one heartbeat at a time. So if you ever meet someone who's 100 years old, you're not simply looking at an old person. You're looking at a biological machine. That has been running continuously for an entire century, and somehow it's still running.